Are You Afraid of the Dark? 5. Author, Sidney Sheldon. Her father was a surgeon and her mother was an artist, and Diane had begun to draw when she was 3. She attended St. Paul's boarding school, and when she was a freshman in college, she had a brief relationship with her charismatic mathematics teacher. He told her he wanted to marry her because she was the only woman in the world for him. When Diane learned that he had a wife and 3 children, she decided that either his math or his memory was defective, and transferred to Wellesley College. She was obsessed with art and spent every spare moment painting. By the time Diane graduated, she had begun selling her paintings and was acquiring a reputation as an artist of promise. That fall, a prominent Fifth Avenue art gallery gave Diane her own art show, and it was a huge success. The owner of the gallery, Paul Deacon, was a wealthy, erudite African American who had helped nurture Diane's career. Opening night, the salon was crowded. Deacon hurried up to Diane, a big smile on his face. "Congratulations. We've already sold most of the paintings. I'm going to set up another exhibition in a few months, as soon as you're ready." Diane was thrilled. "That's wonderful, Paul. You deserve it." He patted her on the shoulder and bustled off. Diane was signing an autograph when a man came up behind her and said, "I like your curves." Diane stiffened. Furious, she spun around and opened her mouth to make a sharp retort, when he went on. "They have the delicacy of a Rossetti or a Manet." He was studying one of her paintings on the wall. Diane caught herself just in time. "Oh." She took a closer look at the man. He appeared to be in his mid-30s. He was about 6 feet tall, with an athletic build, blonde hair, and bright blue eyes. He was dressed in a soft tan suit, a white shirt, and a brown tie. "I thank you." "When did you begin painting?" "When I was a child. My mother was a painter." He smiled. "My mother was a cook, but I can't cook." "I know your name. I'm Richard Stevens." At that moment, Paul Deacon approached with 3 packages. "Here are your paintings, Mr. Stevens. Enjoy them." He handed them to Richard Stevens and walked away. Diane looked at him in surprise. "You bought 3 of my paintings. I have 2 more in my apartment." I am flattered. I appreciate talent." "Thank you." He hesitated. "Well, you're probably busy, so I'll run." Diane heard herself saying, "No. I'm fine." His smile widened. "Good. You could do me a big favor, Miss West." Diane looked at his left hand. He was not wearing a wedding band. "Yes. I happen to have 2 tickets for the opening of a revival of Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit tomorrow night, and I have no one to go with. If you're free." Diane studied him a moment. He seemed nice and was very attractive, but, after all, he was a total stranger. Too dangerous. Much too dangerous. And she heard herself say, "I would love to go." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The following evening turned out to be delightful. Richard Stevens was an amusing companion, and there was an instant compatibility. They shared an interest in art and music, and much more. She felt attracted to him, but she was not sure whether he felt the same way about her. At the end of the evening, Richard asked, "Are you free tomorrow night?" Diane's answer was an unhesitating yes. The following evening they were having dinner at a quiet restaurant in Soho. "Tell me about you, Richard." "Not much to tell. I was born in Chicago. My father was an architect and designed buildings all over the world, and my mother and I traveled with him. I went to about a dozen different foreign schools and learned to speak a few languages in self-defense." "What do you do for a living?" "I work at KIG Kingsley International Group. It's a large think tank." "That sounds exciting." "It's fascinating. We do cutting-edge technology research. If we had a motto, it would be something like, if we don't have the answer now, wait until tomorrow." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. After dinner, Richard took Diane home. At her door, he took her hand and said, "I enjoyed the evening. Thank you." And he was gone. Diane stood there, watching him walk away. "I'm glad he's a gentleman and not a wolf. I'm really glad. Damn." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. They were together every night after that, and each time Diane saw Richard, she felt the same warm glow. On a Friday evening, Richard said, "I coach a little league team on Saturdays. Would you like to come along and watch?" Diane nodded. "I'd love to, coach." The following morning, Diane watched Richard working with the eager young ball players. He was gentle and caring and patient, screaming with joy when 10-year-old Tim Holm caught a fly ball, and it was obvious that they adored him. Diane thought, "I'm falling in love. I'm falling in love." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A few days later, Diane had a carefree luncheon with a few women friends, and as they left the restaurant, they passed a gypsy fortune-telling parlor. On an impulse Diane said, "Let's have our fortunes told." "I can't, Diane. I have to get back to work." "So do I. I have to pick up Johnny." "Why don't you go? Tell us what she said." "All right. I will." 5 minutes later, Diane found herself sitting alone with a sunken-faced crone with a mouthful of gold teeth and a dirty shawl over her head. "This is nonsense," Diane thought. "Why am I doing this?" But she knew why she was doing it. She wanted to ask if she and Richard had a future together. "It's just for the fun of it," she told herself. Diane watched as the old woman picked up a tarot deck and began to shuffle the cards, never looking up. "I would like to know if SHHH." The woman turned up a card. It was the picture of the Fool, colorfully dressed and carrying a satchel. The woman studied it a moment. "There are many secrets for you to learn." She turned up another tarot card. This is the moon. You have desires you are uncertain about. Diane hesitated and nodded. Does this involve a man? Yes. The old woman turned up the next card. This is the lover's card. Diane smiled. Is that a good omen? We will see. The next 3 cards will tell us. She turned over another card. The Hanged Man. She frowned, paused, and turned up the next card. The Devil, she muttered. Is that bad? Diane asked lightly. The gypsy fortune-teller did not answer. Diane watched as the old woman turned up the next card. She shook her head. Her voice was eerily hollow. The Death card. Diane got to her feet. I don't believe in any of this, she said angrily. The old woman looked up, and when she spoke, her voice was macabre. It does not matter what you believe. Death is all around you. Chapter 3. Berlin, Germany. The police commandant, Otto Schiffer, 2 uniformed police officers, and the superintendent of the apartment building, Herr Karl Goetz, were staring at the naked, shriveled body lying at the bottom of the overflowing bathtub. A faint bruise circled her neck. The police commandant held a finger under the dripping tap. Cold. He sniffed at the empty liquor bottle on the side of the tub and turned to the building's superintendent. Her name? Sonia Verbrugge. Her husband is Franz Verbrugge. He is some kind of scientist. She lived in this apartment with her husband. 7 years. They were wonderful tenants. Always paid their rent on time. Never any trouble. Everyone loved. He realized what he was about to say and stopped. Did Frau Verbrugge have a job? Yes, at the Cyberlin Internet Cafe, where people pay to use the computers for what led you to discover the body. It was because of the cold water tap in the bathtub. I tried to fix it several times, but it would never turn completely off. So this morning the tenant in the apartment below complained about water dripping through his ceiling. I came up here, knocked on the door, and when there was no answer, I opened it with my passkey. I came into the bathroom and found. His voice choked. A detective came into the bathroom. No liquor bottles in the cabinets, just wine. The commandant nodded. Right. He pointed to the liquor bottle on the side of the tub. Have that tested for fingerprints? Yes, sir. The commandant turned to Karl Goetz. Do you know where Herr Verbrugge is? No, I always see him in the morning, when he leaves for work, but he made a helpless gesture. You did not see him this morning. No. Do you know if Herr Verbrugge was planning to take a trip somewhere? No, sir. I do not. The commandant turned to the detective. Talk to the other tenants. Find out if Frau Verbrugge seemed depressed lately, or if she and her husband quarreled, and if she was a heavy drinker. Get all the information you can. He looked at Karl Goetz. We will check on her husband. If you think of anything that might be helpful, Karl Goetz said tentatively. I do not know whether this is helpful, but one of the tenants told me that an ambulance was parked in front of the building last night, and he asked if anyone was sick. By the time I went outside to see what was happening, the ambulance was gone. Does that help? The commandant said, it will be looked into. What about her body? Karl Goetz asked nervously. The medical examiner is on his way. Empty the tub and throw a towel over her. Chapter 4. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Killed last night, we found his body under a bridge. For Diane Stevens, time had stopped. She wandered aimlessly through the large apartment filled with memories and thought, its comfort has gone, its warmth has gone, without Richard, it is only a collection of cold bricks. It will never come alive again. Diane sank onto the couch and closed her eyes. Richard, darling, the day we were married, you asked what I would like as a gift. I told you I didn't want anything. But I do now. Come back to me. It doesn't matter if I can't see you. Just hold me in your arms. I'll know you're here. I need to feel your touch once more. I want to feel you stroking my breast. I want to imagine that I can hear your voice saying that I make the best paella in the world. I want to hear your voice asking me to stop pulling the bed covers Ojefiu. I want to hear you telling me that you love me. She tried to stop the sudden flow of tears, but it was impossible. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. From the time Diane realized that Richard was dead, she spent the next several days locked away in their darkened apartment, refusing to answer the telephone or the door. She was like a wounded animal, hiding. She wanted to be alone with her pain. Richard, there were so many times I wanted to say I love you, so that you would say I love you, too. But I didn't want to sound needy. I was a fool. Now I'm needy. Finally, when the constant ringing of the telephone and the incessant sound of the doorbell would not stop, Diane opened the door. Carolyn Turr, one of Diane's closest friends, stood there. She looked at Diane and said, "You look like hell." Her voice softened. "Everyone's been trying to reach you, honey. We've all been worried sick." "I'm sorry, Carolyn, but I just can't." Carolyn took Diane in her arms. "I know. But there are a lot of friends who want to see you." Diane shook her head. "No. I'm Diane. Richard's life is over, but yours isn't. Don't shut out the people who love you. I'll start making calls." Friends of Diane and Richard began telephoning and coming to the apartment, and Diane found herself listening to the endless litany of the clichés of death. Think of it this way, Diane. Richard is at peace. God called him, darling. I know Richard is in heaven, shining down on you. He's passed over to a better place. He's joined the angels. Diane wanted to scream. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The stream of visitors seemed endless. Paul Deacon, the owner of the art gallery that displayed Diane's work, came to the apartment. He put his arms around Diane and said, "I've been trying to reach you, but I know. I'm so sad about Richard. He was a rare gentleman. But, Diane, you can't shut yourself away like this. People are waiting to see more of your beautiful work. I can't. It's not important anymore, Paul. Nothing is. I'm through." She could not be persuaded. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The following day, when the doorbell rang, Diane reluctantly went to the door. She looked through the peephole, and there seemed to be a small crowd outside. Puzzled, Diane opened the door. There were a dozen young boys in the hallway. One of them was holding a little bouquet of flowers. "Good morning, Mrs. Stevens." He handed the bouquet to Diane. "Thank you." She suddenly remembered who they were. They were members of the Little League team that Richard had coached. Diane had received countless baskets of flowers, cards of condolence, and emails, but this was the most touching gift of all. "Come in," Diane said. The boys trooped into the room. "We just wanted to tell you how bad we feel. Your husband was a great guy. He was really cool. And he was an awesome coach." It was all Diane could do to hold back her tears. "Thank you. He thought you were great, too. He was very proud of all of you." She took a deep breath. "Would you like some soft drinks or?" Tim Holm, the 10-year-old who had caught the fly ball, spoke up. "No, thanks, Mrs. Stevens. We just wanted to tell you that we'll miss him, too." We all chipped in for the flowers. They cost $12. Anyway, we just wanted you to know how sorry we are. Diane looked at them and said quietly, "Thank you, boys. I know how much Richard would appreciate your coming here." She watched as they mumbled their goodbyes and left. As Diane observed their departure, she remembered the first time she had watched Richard coach the boys. He had talked to them as though he were their age, in language they understood, and they loved him for it. That was the day I started to fall in love with him. Outside, Diane could hear the rumble of thunder and the first drops of rain beginning to roll down against the windows, like God's tears. Rain. It had been on a holiday weekend. Do you like picnics? Richard asked. I adore them. He smiled. I knew it. I'll plan a little picnic for us. I'll pick you up tomorrow at noon. It was a beautiful, sunny day. Richard had arranged for a picnic in the middle of Central Park. There was silverware and linens, and when Diane saw what was in the picnic basket, she laughed. Roast beef, a ham, cheeses, 2 large pates, an assortment of drinks and half a dozen desserts. There's enough for a small army. Who's going to join us? And an unbidden thought popped into her mind. A minister? She blushed. Richard was watching her. Are you all right? All right? I've never been so happy. Yes, Richard. He nodded. Good. We won't wait for the army. Let's start. While they ate, there was so much to talk about, and every word seemed to bring them closer. There was a strong sexual tension building up between them, and they could both feel it. And in the middle of this perfect afternoon, it began to rain. In a matter of minutes, they were soaked. Richard said ruefully, I'm sorry about this. I should have known better. The paper said no rain. I'm afraid it spoiled our picnic. And Diane moved close to him and said softly, has it? And she was in his arms and her lips were pressed against his, and she could feel the heat racing through her body. When she finally pulled back, she said, we have to get out of these wet clothes. He laughed. You're right. We don't want to catch. Diane said, your place or mine. And Richard suddenly became very still. Diane, are you sure? I'm asking because, this isn't just a one-night stand. Diane said quietly, I know. Half an hour later they were in Diane's apartment, undressing, and their arms were around each other, and their hands were exploring tantalizing places, and finally, when they could stand it no longer, they got into bed. Richard was gentle and tender and passionate and frenzied, and it was magic, and his tongue found her and moved slowly, and it felt as though warm waves were gently lapping at a velvet beach, and then he was deep inside her, filling her. They spent the rest of the afternoon, and most of the night, talking and making love, and they opened their hearts to each other, and it was wonderful beyond words. In the morning, while Diane was making their breakfast, Richard asked, will you marry me, Diane? And she turned to him and said softly, oh, yes. The wedding took place 1 month later. The ceremony was warm and wonderful, with friends and family congratulating the newlyweds. Diane looked over at Richard's beaming face and thought of the fortune-teller's ridiculous prediction, and smiled. They had planned to leave for a honeymoon in France the week after the wedding, but Richard had called her from work. A new project has just come up and I can't get away. Is it all right if we do it in a few months? Sorry, baby. She said, of course it's all right, darling. Do you want to come out and have lunch with me today? I'd love that. You like French food? I know a great French restaurant. I'll pick you up in half an hour. 30 minutes later, Richard was outside, waiting for Diane. Hi, honey. I have to see one of our clients off at the airport. He's leaving for Europe. We'll say goodbye and then go on to lunch. She hugged him. Fine. When they arrived at Kennedy Airport, Richard said, he has a private plane. We'll meet him on the tarmac. A guard passed them through to a restricted area, where a Challenger was parked. Richard looked around. He's not here yet. Let's wait in the plane. All right. They walked up the steps and entered the luxurious aircraft. The engines were running. The flight attendant walked in from the cockpit. Good morning. Good morning, Richard said. Diane smiled. Good morning. They watched the flight attendant close the cabin door. Diane looked at Richard. How late do you think your client is going to be? He shouldn't be very long. The roar of the jet started getting louder. The plane began to taxi. Diane looked out the window, and her face paled. Richard, we're moving. Richard looked at Diane in surprise. Are you sure? Look out the window. She was panicking. Tell the pilot, what do you want me to tell him? To stop? I can't. He's already started. There was a moment of silence and Diane looked at Richard, her eyes wide. Where are we going? Oh, didn't I tell you? We're going to Paris. You said you liked French food. She gasped. Then her expression changed. Richard, I can't go to Paris now. I have no clothes. I have no makeup. I have no. Richard said, I heard they have stores in Paris. She looked at him a moment, then flung her arms around him. Oh, you fool, you. I love you. He grinned. You wanted a honeymoon. You've got it. Chapter 5. At Orly, a limousine was waiting to take them to the Hotel Plaza Athénée. When they arrived, the manager said, Your suite is ready for you, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens. Thank you. They were booked into suite 310. The manager opened the door, and Diane and Richard walked inside. Diane stopped in shock. Half a dozen of her paintings were hanging on the walls. She turned to look at Richard. How did that? Richard said innocently, I have no idea. I guess they have good taste here, too. Diane gave him a long, passionate kiss. Paris was a wonderland. Their first stop was at Givenchy, to buy outfits for both of them, then over to Louis Vuitton, to get luggage for all their new clothes. They took a leisurely walk down the Champs-Élysées to the Place de la Concorde, and saw the storied Arc de Triomphe, and the Palais Bourbon, and La Madeleine. They strolled along La Place Vendôme, and spent a day at the Musée du Louvre. They wandered through the sculpture garden of the Musée Rodin and had romantic dinners at Auberge de Trois Bonheurs, and Au Petit Chez Soi, and D. Chez Lux. The only thing that seemed odd to Diane was the telephone calls Richard received at peculiar hours. Who was that? Diane asked once, at 3 a.m., as Richard finished a phone conversation. Just routine business. In the middle of the night? By the way, Diane. Diane. She was shaken out of her reverie. Carolyn Tur was standing over her. Are you all right? I am fine. Carolyn put her arms around Diane. You just need time. It's only been a few days. She hesitated. By the way, have you made arrangements for the funeral? Funeral. The saddest word in the English language. It carried the sound of death, an echo of despair. I haven't been able to. Let me help you with it. I'll pick out a casket and no. The word came out harsher than Diane had intended. Carolyn was looking at her, puzzled. When Diane spoke again, her voice was shaky. Don't you see? This is the last thing I can ever do for Richard. I want to make his funeral special. He'll want all his friends there, to say goodbye. Tears were running down her cheeks. Diane, I have to pick out Richard's casket to make sure he sleeps comfortably. There was nothing more Carolyn could say. That afternoon, Detective Earl Greenberg was in his office when the call came. Diane Stevens is on the phone for you. Oh, no. Greenberg remembered the slap in the face the last time he had seen her. What now? She probably has some new beef. He picked up the phone. Detective Greenberg. This is Diane Stevens. I'm calling for 2 reasons. The first is to apologize. I behaved very badly, and I'm truly sorry. He was taken aback. You don't have to apologize, Mrs. Stevens. I understood what you were going through. He waited. There was a silence. You said you had 2 reasons for calling. Yes. My husband's. Her voice broke. My husband's body is being held somewhere by the police. How do I get Richard back? I'm arranging for his funeral at the Dalton mortuary. The despair in her voice made him wince. Mrs. Stevens, I'm afraid that some red tape is involved. First, the coroner's office has to file a report on the autopsy, and then it's necessary to notify the various. He was thoughtful for a moment, then made his decision. Look, you have enough on your mind. I'll make the arrangements for you. Everything will be set within 2 days. Oh. I thank you. Thank you very. Her voice choked up and the connection was broken. Earl Greenberg sat there a long time, thinking about Diane Stevens and the anguish she was going through. Then he went to work cutting red tape. ******. The Dalton mortuary was located on the east side of Madison Avenue. It was an impressive 2-story building with the facade of a southern mansion. Inside, the decor was tasteful and understated, with soft lighting and whispers of pale curtains and drapes. Diane said to the receptionist, I have an appointment with Mr. Jones. Diane Stevens. Thank you. The receptionist spoke into a phone, and moments later the manager, a gray-haired, pleasant-faced man, came out to greet Diane.